all-round music nerd, journalist, musician, anything to do with music, I'll try my hand at it. Now, the Delic sessions are a series of fortnightly seminars hosted by Delic with a panel of experts focusing on the inner workings of the music business, uncovering systemic problems and asking how we rebuild towards a fairer future. Built by artists, Delic brings together the essential elements of a modern music business. It will provide a cloud-based digital project organizer, automated rights management, and a slick artist profile hub to manage your songs, share your music, and build your business. So that's the trade bit done. Let's move on to the actual chat. Billions of dollars in unpaid royalties lie in mysterious black box accounts all over the world. It's an entire underground economy that nobody in music likes to talk about, not least those profiting from it. In our second Delic session, we asked who's holding all the cash and how can artists claim what's rightfully theirs? As I say, I'm Vic Galloway and I'm joined by an esteemed panel. Vickie Nauman, a digital music pioneer and founder owner of Cross Border Works. Vickie, tell us a little bit about your career in music, because you've done all sorts of different things up to this point.
Yeah, thanks so much, Vic. Yeah, I was working in radio back in another lifetime, and when the first Napster happened, I tried it, and I was like, okay, my mind blown. Everything just changed. Everything's different. I want to learn how this works. I want to legalize it. I want to work on it, and I went to work at one of the first legally licensed services called Real Networks called MusicNet. And I was very naive because I thought, when I worked in radio, it's like, oh, we always had all these label people coming in with artists. And I thought, this is awesome. I'm sure everybody wants the same thing. And then I got to this company and I realized very, very quickly, oh, this is going to be a really, really long battle, because there was a protectionism around CD sales and not wanting to have these legally licensed services. None of the labels would give us any of their music. So I realized, like, this is going to take a long time. Whereas I had gone into it thinking, all we have to do is put a transaction engine on this Napster thing and we're done. And here we are 20 years later, we're still figuring all of it out. But I did that, and then I realized I probably wouldn't learn very well in that company, and I went to a radio station in Seattle called KEXP, which is a little taste-making station, and they had gotten funding from Paul Allen. So I built out one of the first DMCA compliant services, and understood how to make products and within the context of all these new laws. And then went from there and did an MBA through the London School of Economics and NYU Stern and HEC. Got my feet wet around doing some international business and licensing music back from China and Europe into MSN and iTunes. And then I got a call and joined Sonos. And so I was able to get the hardware, software, content understanding of how to get music flowing through devices. And then after that, I started up Seven Digital's US business, which is a London-based back-end music provider, and did that for 4.5 years. And then I was completely burned out, and I resigned. It was like Sisyphus, I resigned and I took 4 months off and I just worked in my garden. And then I thought, well, what is it that I want to do? And I just thought I love working with a mix of companies, because I get to have my hands, I get to stay above the tree line, and I get to have my fingers in lots of little pots. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 7 years. And I work with companies, everyone from Beat Saber, and I license all the music for Beat Saber, and I work with Oculus to, I helped Spotify when they were in the middle of publishing issues. I work with Bose, with Downtown Music, with Sound Exchange. And most of my business revolves around sitting in between tech companies and music companies and helping technology make sense of the music industry, and then just subject matter expert in how all of these very complicated things work.
Well, you are without doubt an absolute expert, and I feel like a complete idiot next to you. So thank you very much for joining us, Vickie. Tom Gray, now you're a songwriter, composer, Mercury Music Prize winner, director at the PRS, the Ivors Academy, and you're leading the charge with the Broken Records campaign. Tell us a bit about your journey so far, Tom.
It's not quite as exciting as Vickie's, but I suppose it was another lifetime. When I was a kid, I wanted to work in politics. I didn't want to be a rock and roll star. So I don't know what went wrong. And and I was all set to go, and I remember I was about to go and start an internship with a senator in DC. That'd have been like 22 or something like that. And we signed, and my friends from back home who I'd been recording with every summer got a record contract. And they were like, we've got a record contract. And I was like, I could probably leave this politics business for a minute. And obviously that was Gomez, and we won a Mercury Prize, and then became a big touring band for many, many years. And played at KEXP many times, and then probably around 2011, we'd been on the road for like 14 years, and we were all a bit, and the music business was kind of on its knees, and there didn't seem to be much point in making new albums at the time, and we just sort of went, well, we finished our contract with ATO at the time, and went, let's just stop for a bit. It's kind of got a bit boring, and it's really hard, and we're just having to gig to make money because records are dead. So I kind of came back and became a composer for TV, and I've ended up working a lot in theatre. I'm working with the Roald Dahl Society at the moment on a stage adaptation. I've a new TV show just starting on Hulu in the States called In My Skin. That starts on Thursday, I think. It's very exciting. And then I just got to a moment, I suppose, when I realized there probably wasn't many people like me who were grounded in politics and came through politics and knew lots of eminent politicians, and was also a musician, and thought I should probably get into, representing.
How do I bring these two things together?
How do I bring these two things together? I knew this, I'd known this for a long time, but I'd basically been keeping my head down going, oh God, it can't be me. It shouldn't be me. Surely it's not me. And duly got myself elected to the board of PRS, and I've recently become a director of the Ivors Academy, who represents songwriters in the UK. And I work with the Musicians Union, and I'm a writer-artist advocate for the Featured Artist Coalition as well. So I speak on behalf of musicians a lot across the board, songwriters, artists, producers. And I mean, I think I'm kind of one of these people, I think, who grew up as a producer, writer, artist. I don't see where the lines lie anymore. And I think that's true of most of us these days. And that's it. And then, when COVID started, I think very early on, because I was kind of across everything and have lots of touring friends and work in a PRO, and I just saw what was coming, which was, PRO money was going to collapse because of licensing money drying up. Touring money was going to disappear, and streaming was going to be exposed for what it had always been, which was in a very problematic remuneration system. And we're in the midst of it. And basically I just sort of laid it all out for people at the beginning. I said, this is how it's going to go. It's going to get worse. There's going to be pinch points, and people are going to get more and more angry. So we better organize and think about this and start speaking to legislators and policymakers, and people at record companies and publishing companies, and so that they know that there's going to be a lot of anger out there, and it's going to need to have a place to go. We can't just be throwing bricks at each other. There has to be a solution to this. And that's Broken Record.
Yeah, let's go into it a little bit later as well. I'm sure we'll continue to reference it anyway. But Tom Gray, lovely to have you with us. And again, with that whole list of accolades and achievements, I feel wholly inadequate. And finally, I'm going to turn to John Maxwell Hobbs, who is a musician, media consultant, internet pioneer, and BBC Scotland's former head of technology, and also the founder, CEO, top dog at Delic as well, which is why we're all here. John, in our previous Delic session, you talked all about your, kind of what brought you here, but it's nice to be doing another Delic session, and we've got a couple of real experts with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a key thing that's important to us is helping to educate musicians and creators in general about their rights and kind of unpick everything that's going on in the music business. Part of the thing as well is, and Tom and Vickie have both spoken to this, it's about trying to bring things into not even the future, but where they are today. Things have changed so dramatically. I mean, we're still working with a compensation structure that's based on the old record labels. And the fact is, record labels were not in the business of music. They were in the business of manufacturing a physical product that was made out of petroleum and wood pulp. And basically, music was just this little value add to differentiate this plastic and paper object that they essentially were spending the bulk of their money in selling, moving around, distributing, and manufacturing. Really, probably over 90% of the record labels' expenditures were on making these things. And the rest of it was just this little extra on the top. Well, that's all been stripped away. There are no, little plastic things being sold in the way that they used to be. Yet musicians are being paid as if they're just that little differentiator on the top of something that was originally sold in furniture stores. But they're the ones doing all the hard work, and they're the only ones not getting paid up front. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to be solved around this, and this whole black box thing, which we'll get into in the compensation via royalties. It all worked when everything was positive cash flow. Mm-hmm. And if, as a label, you thought you were getting about the right amount of money from the PROs, you were okay. You didn't really need to dig deeply into the accounting. If, as a musician, you were getting paid enough money to keep you in the status to which you were accustomed, that was okay as well.
Then why dig deeper and find out more?
Yeah, now everybody's pinching pennies and trying to count absolutely everything. But we have a payment infrastructure in the streaming world that is based exactly on the way it was when you couldn't keep track of who was listening. Mm-hmm. We now know exactly who's listening, when they're listening, how much they paid. Yet we're still working on this pro rata, and finding ways to not pay. It's like, oh, you know what? We actually only have records of 98% of the ownership of this specific track, so we can't possibly pay out any money to anybody.
Yeah. Well, let's get to that in just a second. Can I just say to anyone watching live, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, or the chat button. We'd prefer it in the Q&A one, to ask any questions. If we're not covering something that you want to find out about, please put a question in there at any time, and I'll come to the questions towards the end of this session. And if you're watching this on catch up, perhaps you're not actually watching the live stream, then you can email more in-depth questions to hello@delic.network. So that's hello@delic.network. Anyway, there's a lot of money being made, and yet it's not necessarily going to the artist. That's the kind of crux of what we're talking about. How did we get to this situation, Vickie?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to think about the transition that the music industry went through. From, I always look at these things from like a, you know, a cultural as well as a systemic issue. So when we had CDs, it was a, you know, it was like a $20 transaction for the CD. You get the bundle of songs, and all of those songs had been brought together in a, you know, kind of a private process. You know, music retailers, Best Buy and Tower and all the independent retailers didn't have to go out and separately clear publishing to sell all these CDs. So everything was this bundle of rights. The music flowed. People paid a lot of money to get, you know, to get their favorite songs on those plastic discs. And it was a very opaque process. But we also had, in those days, we had, you know, much fewer new music that was released all the time because there were barriers. You know, people couldn't just go into their bedrooms and mix a track and put it up and sell it. You know, they had to go into the studio, and there were all sorts of things. So we had a combination of high transaction amounts and lower volume of music being released. Fast forward a little bit, we get into the digital world, where in the early days it was unbundling into downloads. That was the first time really that we saw this, you know, like this potential opportunity to sell music digitally, but rights were fragmented at that point. So the master recording was cleared over here, all the publishing was cleared over there, but it was still transaction. Now, fast forward yet again, we are in a world now where we have terabytes of transactional data from streaming services, and everything is being done where the digital service providers, Spotify, Apple, you know, Rhapsody, Napster, everybody, Deezer, they report on the master recording, and then either a collective or some sort of third-party rights management system has to match without the clear and consistent use of identifiers, has to match that sound recording to the publishing. And we have an average of 9 songwriters per song now. So if you've got 50 million songs in your streaming service, you have 500 million publishers that you're supposed to pay out. And so we have this systemic problem of the volume of transactions, the volume of songwriters, the lack of a central data repository and identifiers. And this is far beyond a human systems problem. This is a machine matching problem now. And we are, and all the, you know, and money is spilling out, because when you have a master recording and you're trying to match it to 9 different songwriters and 5 of them are not represented and you don't have their data, you can't pay them.
And also I assume that with every publisher and with every kind of royalty collection agency, they're all using different kinds of software and are all using different platforms to calculate their and to do their research and so on. So it's trying to make all of these different machines compatible with each other as well, right?
Exactly. And that's why having unique identifiers like ISRC codes and ISWC codes, having these unique identifiers is really critical, because if you get an 11-digit code that is 100% match, you can be pretty confident that is you know, a good match. But a lot of what these different, you know, the different rights management companies have to do is they have to use, you know, they have to look, you know, is the title match? Does the artist match? Does the album match? You know, can we use to, you know, is there a unique identifier? Is it the correct unique identifier? All of these things are part of the process of saying we have confidence that this is the right person and that we can pay it out. And so
there's huge discrepancies happening left, right, and center. Tom, you mentioned and the term that gets bandied about, I think we've maybe all said something about the black box. Do you want to explain this concept and what it is and why it's there?
Well, there are different areas of the black box, but I suppose the one that's most key to this conversation is money that's lost because of unmatched data, because of unless the data matches up, or if there is data, you can't pay out. Publishers, PROs can't pay money to if they don't know who wrote the track. It's as simple as that. And money, and what happens is the data will come through from like the streaming service or whoever, and there'll be just masses of data, and then they have to sort of dig through it all. And a lot of them are using sort of machine learning and things these days, and massive computer systems to figure the stuff out. But if it doesn't come with like the right identifiers, they just don't know who it goes to. So that money then goes back, stays in the PRO for a certain period of time. I think it's about 2 or 3 years, when you can still get to it. And if you register your work properly, you can maybe get that money. But after that, it completely drops off a cliff and descends into the black box.
Right.
From whence it is usually shoveled into the pockets of the major rights holders, because they, you've got to understand about PROs is the people who own PROs are sort of owned collectively by all of the people who own all of the rights within the PRO. Who owns the most rights within a PRO? A major rights holder. They may represent writers, but they represent publishers as well. And who are the biggest publishers? The major rights holders. So that they hold an enormous amount of power in our PROs. And this is the thing that doesn't get talked about enough, really. And so
they're not in a hurry to change the situation, i.e., match up this data to the correct.
I wouldn't want to cast aspersions, but it may well serve them. Let me tell you a story. I know of another PRO. I won't say who it is, who did some research into who the black box money belongs to, and this was data that has never been shared and is protected behind an NDA to this day. And they did an awful lot of research. They spent a lot of money on it, and they found out that all of it basically belonged to independent songwriters who had badly registered their work, had failed to register their work, hadn't done it properly, hadn't gone through all of the processes, hadn't done their metadata, and then a sort of war broke out in the PRO, because for years, all of this money had just been going out by market share to the biggest rights holders, right? Now here's the thing. The biggest rights holders are actually quite good at registering their data. Mm-hmm. So, unsurprisingly. So this money wasn't theirs. So they had to sort of find a way of shifting the money over to at least try and figure out how to get the money to more of the independent sector, because of this proof, and they did a little bit, but as I say, it's to do with power within these organizations and writers not fully understanding the system, fully understanding their rights within the system, not fully engaging with their PROs, not speaking up enough, not getting sufficiently educated about how this stuff works. I mean, the black box makes it sound like it's the mafia or something, but it's just, it's just some money that's lost in the system.
But it's some money that comes to a figure of about $2.5 billion, I've heard.
Oh, you see that figure? I think that figure is nonsense myself. But I think it's
too little or too large.
I think that it's probably that much over a decade. I think the problem with these money calculations is that they always take the time constant out of it. So, how much it is per year. I think, I've seen data relating to European digital streams and across all of, YouTube and everything like that. And I think there's probably 30 or 40 million getting lost every year at the moment. Mm-hmm. So,
which is still an enormous amount of money.
Oh no, it's insane, and it's probably more than that when you take into account other things that we're not talking about. This is just unallocable money based on unmatched data, which is just one subset of lost monies within our music system. Let's be clear, there are many other areas in which money is getting lost and there are systemic problems whereby all of the different bodies within the different PROs in the world, the way they transfer money to each other and keep a little bit as it goes, and the different labels and their sub labels that keep a little bit of money as it moves through the system. That means that by the time it gets to your account, to your statement, which you have no auditing rights over, which is one of the big problems we have in the music industry, you see this really awful little tiny figure, and it may be that you haven't registered your work properly, or it may be that the system has just ripped you off. It's hard to know which it is.
Is this your kind of experience of looking at this kind of data and these kind of figures as well, Vickie?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that I've been really involved with over the last few years is the passage of the Music Modernization Act in the US. And it's very similar problems to what Thomas is talking about, but with a couple of additional twists. And this is in the US around mechanical rights. And, the US is different from everywhere else in the world in the sense that mechanical rights have not been bundled in with performing rights for like on-demand services like Spotify and Apple and other streaming services. So this problem of where you have the major and established music publishers who ensure that there's a handful of companies that administer rights. They ensure that they get their data correct. But there's like 125,000 publishers in the US. And these are, and I advocate if you're a songwriter, like control your own publishing, set up a publishing company and then hire Cobalt or SongTrust and have them, manage it for you, manage the collections for you. But a lot of people don't do that. And so
that just you saying that sounds like a really sensible thing to do. But I mean, how easy is that? And will Cobalt take you on if you're a fledgling emerging songwriter? Will let's just say you are sussed enough to start up your own publishing company. Will they take you on and help you in a situation like that?
They absolutely will. They absolutely will. And with most of these companies, they're set up. Both SongTrust and Cobalt have set up systems that are able to scale way down for, the up and coming songwriters. Maybe they only have a handful of songs, but those songs might have ownership shares that are getting some traction, and its platform, it's using technology. There's other tiers of service within any of these companies where maybe if you want an advance or you want help, with them to license your music for synchronization or other kinds of things, that they can do that. But they absolutely will. They absolutely will. That's how they're both set up. And
that's interesting.
Yeah, and so I feel like one of the things that is happening in the US around this is the Music Modernization Act was passed and we're in implementation stage, and part of the legislation was to create a mechanical licensing collective, which we call the MLC. And the MLC is set up as a centralized database. They have hired Harry Fox as their vendor provider. But it's a central database for everything under 115 on the on-demand services. And that this is kind of the mother of all black boxes, because we've had companies for years that the way the systems work in the US is that the digital service provider, so the licensee, is not obligated. They don't pay for any mechanical rights that have not been matched. So unlike in Europe and the rest of the world, where digital service providers pay everything to the collectives, and then the collectives are sitting on the black boxes, what's happening here is digital services have basically just, kind of have an accountant, an accounting system where they're like, okay, well, we know we're supposed to pay 12% or 10.5% for these rights. and we've only paid out 60% of that, because that's what our service provider has been able to match. And then they keep the rest of it. They kind of hold it on their books. And over time, as the matches get better, they get invoiced and they pay it out. But there's going to be a settlement as a part of the Music Modernization Act. There's going to be a settlement where all of these digital service money allocated, that they know that they have not been able to pay out everything, that is all going to go into a pot. And
then how is that pot going to be shared out? That's the important thing. Will it all go to massive major label artists, or will it actually help some independent and emerging artists as well?
Yeah, it's going to go into a portal. And so there will be some process where it's going to be open. And so individual songwriters, small publishers can go in and claim what's theirs. But the truth of the matter is, it's probably going to be really cumbersome, because if you're a songwriter and you've written 200 songs and you have your own small publishing company, you're going to have to go in and hunt and peck and search and maybe even listen to the songs in order to say, this one's mine. I wrote a song called Love, right? And so you look up Love, and there's thousands of songs called Love. So then you have to go and you have to find the song that matches that, and that is yours, and you claim it, and then you can participate in that claiming portal. If you have systems, you could probably send them a data feed, and then they would be able to do some matching in there, and then you can go and clean it up. But it's a manual process. And so it's, it's the money is there if you have the money is there if you have the patience and the wherewithal to go through and make sure to claim that.
Well, it sounds like a good start, but as you say, sort of laborious and fairly complex, but at least it's a start. John, tell us how, I think one of the things that's already struck me is that a lot of the money that's hiding in this, or languishing in this black box, or the various black boxes around the place, often, maybe not wholly, but there's some kind of responsibility for the artist here as well. Filling in forms, giving the right data to PROs and so on, and publishers in general. This is something that Delic is looking to really sort out and help with.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a number of things that need to be done from the very start. It's not that there's some nefarious, ne'er-do-well twirling their mustache saying, I've messed with the metadata, now I get all that money. It's a huge amount of it. I'll give an example without naming names, but we, as we're developing the platform, we're testing against various catalogs, some from a label, some from artists. An artist, Scottish band, had a number of hits in the 90s. They've reformed. They brought over the material for us to test with. And the guy said to me, all of the metadata should be registered with PRS, I think. And unfortunately, that's the way it happens too often. Also, look at the releases that have been coming out during COVID, surprising people. 2 days ago, Taylor Swift, brand new album with a whole bunch of new, collaborators, things like that. Now she's got, after 17 years in the business and all of that, a machine looking after her. But these things that are released faster and faster these days, we've had conversations with people at the majors who say we try our best, but we need to get things out to the streaming services, to the shops, etc. We don't have all the data even before we release it, because it tends to be, all of us who create jump in, and all we're trying to do is create.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We're not tracking things throughout the entire process. We get it out, and it's, in my own releases, I've been chasing around for months now between my publisher and ASCAP, the titles are wrong in a release. So that basically means I'm not going to get paid for that. Also dealing with, sound exchange, for example. They say, well, sorry, some of the stuff hasn't been registered. Please, fill out this Excel spreadsheet. So I have to go in and manually put in all of the titles, manually put in all the ISRC codes. Musicians just at some point you just kind of go, I need to work on the next song.
Right.
Small labels, that are just one and two person operations, stuff like that. They just don't have the time to get to that. So one of the things that we're doing, Delic is a tool that handles your workflow. We've got a task manager. We have a whole to-do list, chat, communication between people, and we handle all of the media assets as well, the stems, the rough mixes, all of that. And when those are uploaded to the platform, they're immediately attributed to the person who's uploaded them. So you've got the creator immediately registered. You can then go in, we're basically compliant with DDEX. I can get really anarchy about all of this, but you can go in and say, this person is a creator, musician, a sound engineer, a choral singer, et cetera, et cetera. And we register a person as a creator, which is basically all you need at the beginning. And then you can get more sophisticated beyond that. But that's being done in the background. So we're not asking musicians to say, what's this 13-digit number? And is this okay, I've got a UPC code, I've got an ISRC code, I've got an ICSW code. Human beings are not very good at that.
Mm.
Right.
And we're asking them to be really good at that while we're spending, millions and millions of dollars creating algorithms to generate perfect playlists. And you know what? Human beings are really good at making playlists. And human beings are really good at writing songs. Let's ask the machines to do what machines really love to do, which is keep track of all those sorts of things.
And I suppose in your to-do list, would Delic then remind you once your work is complete or even near completion to then register with all the PROs properly and officially?
Ultimately, that's what we're aiming for. We're in talks with, we had a conversation with PRS. We have a letter of intent now with Tiesto, which is the PRO in Finland, who is actually the most technologically advanced of all the PROs on the planet. So we have an agreement to, at the beginning of the year, work with them to develop an open API that would be available for anybody in the industry to not only deliver the metadata, but to check metadata as well. Because ultimately we're going to make it possible for people who have catalogs, whether it's a label, a publisher, or an individual, to upload their catalogs and validate the metadata against a database. That's what, like the, in the US, and we've spoken to them, but the Mechanical Licensing Consortium as well is looking at doing, because at the moment it's possible to send data to publishers and get things out there. It's not so easy to have it go two ways and validate that it's been done correctly. And that's something that we're going to work on. Toward the end of the year, we're going to be offering digital distribution and publishing services for anybody who doesn't already have a distributor or a publisher. But also just ensuring that the stuff is recorded from the very start, so people know and people are not arguing as well. I mean, there's been...
Oh, come on, you remember 2 months ago when we started this track, it was my idea to use that top line, that verse line, the catchy hook there, that's my idea, that. And the other person's like, no, I can't. Yeah, so all of this is step by step recorded and the data is all there so that no one can try and claim full credit for someone else's work.
Oh, exactly. And I mean, music biographies and documentaries are becoming huge, and with hindsight, or actually with time, people are willing to speak more honestly, let's say. And we're, hearing more and more about all of these, bands who broke up and gave the reason, the romantic, creative differences, or we were too intense for each other. They're all coming out and they're all saying, no, it was all about the royalties. One or two of the band was getting all the money. The rest of us were just making money as side players. And so that's what broke us up, is arguments about, no, I'm the one who contributed that lick. I wrote that part that everything else was based on. Well, we're making it honest. We're keeping track of it. So it's not about, how I remembered it. It's, well, no, if you look at the audit trail here, you uploaded this track on that date and it was used in the final master. And so we can kind of agree who did this.
Well, this is great. Mike has put something in the chat, Mike who's watching, and he says, this sounds like a massive information architecture project. Who would be responsible in instigating a project of this size and paying for it? Is this something the independent artists need to rally together to make this happen, or should they push the publishers to? Talking about finding that money in the black boxes, I assume, and pulling all that data together. Tom, what would you think about that?
I mean,
architecture.
Yeah, I mean, the information architecture is what we all work in these days. Mm-hmm. He's absolutely right. I mean, the banking system seems to do many trillions of lines of more transactions than the music business does every day, and doesn't seem to have any problem with it. It's quite curious, isn't it? So, I mean, the question for me, the big problem is that you have all of these different players, and they're all not speaking to each other, and they're not all using the same data systems. And there are attempts at doing that, which have some of which are good, but there are need for more. It's still ISRC codes and ISWC codes, so the recording and the writing still don't meet up. They're not harmonized in any way, and this is why I spend so much of my time speaking to politicians, because here's what I think all of the black box money should be spent on that. I think that that basically the what we need is data regulation, and people need to meet levels of data compliance across the board. I don't think it's good enough anymore for record companies to say, "Oh, I don't have time to get this right." I just think that's ridiculous. I mean, it's literally the business that you're in is getting this right. So why not? Why not have a data compliance regulation system? I mean, I personally think that would help a lot. I mean, a lot of these PROs, especially globally, don't meet, any
kind of regulation.
Don't meet standards. And there are data standardization systems which are used throughout the banking world, and you can go and get those. You can get certificated whenever you want. For it. So I get very tired of the problem is that we've got a lot of big winners in this system, and they are, like any big things, they are prone to inertia and prone to sitting on their hands and watching the money roll in. And so at some point you've got to put the thumb screws on them. As far as I'm concerned.
And it's up to government. And you've actually got the DCMS Select Committee, the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee, to start acting. Broken Record has kind of lobbied them, and they're now potentially going to lobby the industry. Is that correct? Tell us more about that.
So the Department of Culture Select Committee have asked the government to do a full inquiry into streaming. Whether or not that will happen is another matter, but we're looking to get a debate in Parliament in autumn. And I'm also speaking to the Business and Enterprise Committees who are very interested in it, because I think the lessons that can be learned from music are very great, because you can, I mean, there are so many emerging digital markets now and music is the only mature digital market. And the way that it has failed, and the way that it's been captured by certain global conglomerates, is a big lesson in the kinds of checks and balances that need to be built into these systems, and the way that governments ought to really be in front of this, instead of kind of going, what is this? You know, I'm not a Luddite. I love the technology. What we have to do is engage with the technology and say, but what should this playing field look like? Why is the playing field an absolute mess? And why do none of the players on the field know what the rules are? Which is the present situation.
Sorry,
Vickie.
I wanted to just jump in here because I feel like for the audience, I feel like there are some things that we're doing that are really good steps. And I love hearing about what you're working on, Thomas. It's awesome. Because I feel like there's, if you think of the value chain between a songwriter and then the songwriter, you know, maybe they sign with a publisher, maybe they have their own publishing. You know, they could also sign with a PRO. So there's all these different data points where where metadata is flowing around, and then it gets into a distribution system, and then into a service, and then there's rights management companies. So there's this really big chain, and what we basically have is at one end of that chain, we want unbridled creativity. We want artists, like do whatever you want, write whatever you want. There's no limits anymore. You can write, you don't have to do 3-minute songs for radio. You can do a 10-minute song, or you can do a 30-minute song. You could do a 15-second song. And then at the other end of that value chain, we need the efficiency of like a Visa, MasterCard. And we have a lot of different things in between these points, and they're all points of cleanup. And I feel like there have been some really significant efforts in this world, where over the last few years, there's been so much discussion about this that I think artists themselves are getting more educated. Their eyes are opening, and they're putting pressure on their performing rights organizations, their labels, and their publishers for greater transparency. And, the more, that's how the industry changes, is when artists demand change. And so I feel like, that's a positive movement. I think many more artists are informed and they're activated. And then we also have had things like the Music Modernization Act on the other side of the spectrum that has a mandate in the legislation for a publicly accessible database of mechanical rights. And so, and then an API and a feed. And so this, I feel like with the MLC, there's a lot of things that could go wrong. There's a lot of reasons why it could fail. There's a lot of reasons why people might be naysayers. But that one bit of information that's in the legislation that is requiring an open data set is critical, because that's when we can start to have data exchanges with other organizations around the world that's built around a comprehensive singular database that is not a silo. And we've got a lot of databases, but they're all silos. And so they're not necessarily doing the best data practices of what we see in the technology industry of having, data feeds and incremental feeds and making sure that you have the most current data. And so I feel like that is another really, really positive movement that's happening here, that I'm hoping in other parts of the world that they will also start looking at legislation and mandating.
Well, it's worth saying that we have unfortunately, the UK is obviously Brexiting, but the European Copyright Directive just occurred over here, which gives artists auditing rights over everybody, and sub-publishers and everyone else, annual auditing rights. It's an incredible thing. It's a beautiful thing if it actually gets put into national government legislation across Europe, which hopefully it will be, but we'll see.
Well,
we will probably need lots of companies like Delic and other startups that are small and nimble, that it's in their interest to start solving some of these problems and representing collections of artists. Because I feel like, John, is that exactly as you were saying, like an artist wants to create music. They don't want to manage their ISRC codes and their ISWC codes. But increasingly, I'm seeing the next generation of artists being very entrepreneurial, almost like little miniature startups, where they are, they're saying, okay, well, these are all the things that I need to do for my career. This is my team. And then these are my platforms that I'm going to use to manage all of this. And we need a really good startup economy so that it is the right incentive. And to Mike's question in the, in about information architecture, who's incentivized to pay for it? I don't think there's going to be one company that solves this problem everywhere. It's going to be thousands and thousands of small companies that are acting on behalf of artists and that have the enough technical wherewithal to integrate into these massive systems.
Okay, well, let's look at some of the questions that have come in. Anonymous attendee gets one here. You see a lot of discussion around looking at change in the streaming service model to make payments fairer for artists. Do you think that will make a difference, or do you believe it has to go higher and look at change in business models for artists' rights? And if so, how will technology giants adapt to that, or will that be the downfall of distributed rights? Tom, that's a sort of multi-level question there. What do you think of that?
I don't know. I mean, I think obviously you've got to look at, whenever you want to look fixing streaming, you have to look at fixing the existing licensing environment. And the existing licensing environment is the thing that's letting down artists for the most part, because they as John pointed out, like historically people signed these deals where they only got 20% because the record company had all of these costs, and those deals are still in effect going back all the way to 1985. And we have this streaming system that pays like a distribution but is a license. Now this is a very curious thing that the music industry, that's at the birth of Spotify, they came to this solution that here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a licensing system that pays like a distribution, which means you get paid per little bit that out of the total system. And there's no reason to run it that way. It's essentially, it was a choice that benefited the biggest rights holders because they had those kinds of deals. And if they ever, I mean, it's worth understanding that most of those old record deals in them, if it was recognized as a license, it was a 50-50 split between you and your record label, not an 80-20 split as it would have been on a distribution. So had they been honest about that in the first place, I think artists would be fine now. And it's just sad that isn't what happened. Similarly, if it's a license, the song should be getting half of the money, which is what it would be if it was licensed to a TV show or something like that. Similarly, in a licensing environment, that's how the money would be split. But here's what happens: the biggest rights holders, who hold the doors open, who basically own the keys to the car, get allowed through the door first to negotiate the value of their rights. So unsurprisingly, the major labels get the lion's share of the money. And that sets the deal for all of the labels. And so you're fine. At the moment, streaming is working great for a certain subset of artists, and usually an independent artist, usually a solo independent artist, and usually one that works within a tight genre. And that's fine. If that's the only kind of artist we want to see ever again, then we should leave things as they are. But if we want to see bands and orchestras and duos even, we've got to do something about it. And so that I think COVID is the thing. COVID is the great reckoning. If we can't change now, we'll never change it. It's as simple as that. What kind of change do we need? Well, there's so many options.
Yeah.
There's so many options. You can just split the money differently. You could go a quarter to the streaming service, a quarter to the label, a quarter to the artist, a quarter to the song. That's a very nice way of doing it. We could move to user-centric payments, which I think are very sensible because they restore moral rights to the consumer.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that, the user-centric payment system. Deezer are bringing that in, aren't they?
Well, no, Deezer want to and have tried very hard to.
Exactly.
They want to, but somebody's got their boot on their neck and isn't letting them. And and they might be a major label. I'm not, so it's a really difficult situation. User-centric just means that your individual subscription gets divided up amongst what you individually listen to.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of people using subscription services think is what's happening already. And sadly, that isn't what happens. All of the money gets taken away, pooled in a giant pool, and then gets split up via consumption share amongst all of the music in the world. And it massively favors major rights holders and big artists, and massively disadvantages regional music, niche music, and things like that. So that might not be the solution, but what it is a great way of breaking up the existing licensing system, which I don't think is great and would like to see change. And so a lot of the time, the reason why I favor user-centrics is because I think it would allow for a big paradigm shift and would allow us to renegotiate the values of how we split up the money that's coming through that system. I'm very pragmatic about it, though. I don't really mind how we sort this out. We just have to get more money to the writers and the artists.
Yeah, just before we continue, I just want to say something quickly. We're going to run over a little bit for a few more questions. We're sort of supposed to be finishing at 6, but we're just going to run over maybe 10 minutes or so just to get through some of these questions, if that's all right. Vickie, you were going to jump in there.
Yeah, exactly, because I feel like there's like, I've looked at this as well. I worked with Will Page, and we did a study on like, what will user-centric have better results? And it's really, really unclear. Because in part what you do is when you have the systems that we have now for streaming services, you put all the streams and all the money, you divide them out, you back it out into a per stream rate, and then you calculate and you pay according to the number of streams that artist had. And so I do feel like it is a democratized layer, in the sense that everybody gets paid the same and allocated by the same amount per stream. But I think I'm not 100%. I have 2 points to make. One is I'm not 100% sure that it will be better for all of the artists in a user-centric environment, because I think that sometimes you actually are going to get lifted a little bit by having that per stream rate. I think and my second point is that I don't believe that that the systems and the services work for any artists who are not volume based, which is what our entire models are right now. Is if you have, billions and billions of streams, if you're a hip hop artist and your music, it hits a lot of playlists, and you are just doing a volume of streams. There's also been even like sleep playlists and calm playlists of, people that have made a ton of money because there's a volume of streaming. But if you're a Zoe Keating, or if you're an indie band that might have a small but passionate audience, they're not necessarily listening to billions of streams of yours, but that doesn't, so like the services don't always equate the value of an artist to their fans by how the royalties are calculated. And I feel like this is a different kind of problem of how can we level this out based on something other than just volume of streams, because that doesn't work for all artists.
Yeah. Well, that's where user-centric, I think, it does work. Like I said, I don't think user-centric sorts out the remuneration problem. It doesn't. It doesn't. There might be a small, looking at the data I've seen, there might be a small balancing factor where it takes about 5% off the top earners and moves it down the food chain, which ain't no bad thing as far as I'm concerned. But what it does is it restores the moral right of the consumer and says, what I listen to is what is going to get my money. So I can cater my tastes to what I know is going to get paid. And I can, for instance, at the moment, your money will, if you're an average listener on, for instance, on Spotify, most of your subscription is going to music that you don't listen to. Mm-hmm. That's what's happening right now, right? Most of your subscription, if you're an average listener, most of your subscription is going to music that you don't listen to. And that is a curious effect. And that means, and I don't want my money to go to misogynistic hip hop, to be frank. I don't want it to. So why am I funding it? And that's problematic. And at some point, that will have to be solved as a problem, because the music business is full of ethical issues, right? Lots of ethical problems, and this is one of them. User-Centric solves that ethical problem, but as I say, it's not necessarily the cure-all. Far from it. Another thing that we have is that we know that music gets played via playlist. Now, when music gets played to you, is that the same action as when you choose music to listen to? Because
that was actually a question I was going to ask next. So it's really, because I mean, basically everyone's, especially new and emerging artists who don't have an established fan base, they are dying to get chosen for any number of playlists. Please choose us. We don't care what the playlist is. Just make sure it's got lots of listeners, and we just want our streams to go up. Do those people choose to listen to you? I mean, they perhaps don't even like your song on the playlist. Who knows? But it's a real conundrum, I think.
Yeah, well, it's precisely. Yeah, I mean, if it's communication to the public rather than a purchase, it should be paid through PROs. And not as a distribution through record companies, and so that's another way of solving the issue. Also, the European Copyright Directive actually introduces an idea which is another remuneration right. The Spanish already have a right that pays 5% straight through to performers from the streaming services, and essentially this is a replication of that. To say that we're just going to take money off the top and pass it round the outside straight to the performers. And there's another way you can solve it. I mean, the streaming services claim that there's extreme price sensitivity, but we've seen in Norway that that's just not true. And they have, if you added £1 or $1 to Spotify, and you said to subscribers, we're adding this because it is just going to go to the artists and writers of the songs. That's the only place it can go. It can't go to anyone else. Mm-hmm. Do you think they'd say no? Of course they wouldn't. I mean, I've seen the consumer research on this, and I know that they don't say no. So we can talk about it all day.
Well, let's get through a few of these other questions. Nick Blake has been in touch saying, what do you think of the M&M lawsuit against Spotify, HSA, Cobalt? I'm not aware of this, actually. I've not been following it. So, Vickie, do you know anything about it?
It's basically, yeah. I mean, it's basically the same problem of in the system that we are living in pre-MMA. You have to get an individual license for every single song and every share of a composition. And so Spotify hired Harry Fox to do this as their rights administration company for that matching work. And what this lawsuit is claiming is that they did not issue licenses in the proper manner at the right time to use that music, and that means therefore that Spotify has infringed on the use of this catalog and these rights. And so, there have been a lot of lawsuits in this country. Some were settled, some were very public, some were very quiet, but we've had a ton of litigation around this issue. And it all comes down to a really, really broken system around having to get, individual licenses and sending out notices of intent and working with the U.S. Copyright Office. And so it's, it is what it is. And that's part of what the MMA is going to attempt to address is saying, like moving from individual licenses to blanket licenses, and also removing statutory damages, because the statutory damages here are just, like if it's up to $150,000 per stream. So, you have 10,000 streams and you're very, very quickly into, enormous amounts of money, which I will say is a great opportunity for litigation lawyers, it's not such a great opportunity for artists to be able to actually participate in that. So I'm happy to see an end to some of this litigation and more of a focus on building open and transparent systems.
Okay, that's a great answer. There's one from anonymous attendee once again for you, Tom. Given your position with PRS, what's the internal discussion around improving accuracy of payments to the non-songwriters?
Well, I mean, as we've probably stated rather a lot, the onus at the moment is on the songwriter to register their work correctly. And to register, and their publisher, if they have one, to register it correctly. So, you know, it's a lot of hand wringing, really. I mean, it's you know, you've got to register your songs properly, kids. It's kind of like that, you know. And what else do you want me to say? There's just, if you've gone to the trouble of writing a song, and you love your song and you love it like a child, then, you know, make sure it goes to the right school. You know, it's not complicated.
Okay, well, yes. I mean, there is an onus and a responsibility on the songwriters themselves. In terms of the accuracy of payments, is it all to do with?
Oh, right, accuracy. I mean, sorry, no. I mean, yeah, we work very, very, very hard on accuracy on payments that of money that can go to people. I mean, I think our last 4 payments have been 99% accuracy. Okay. And we're very, I mean, the PRS is very, very highly rated for data standardization, and we and the board are very, very strong on it. So the problem is this lump of money that we can't give to anybody, and what we do with it. And that is that's more of a source of an argument between different stakeholders than I mean, we're all on the same side in terms of making sure the money goes to the right people when we have the data.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I'm going to move on. Sorry, John, I'm kind of leaving you out here a little bit. I'm going to ask this next question to Vickie as well, from Bob Rothstein, who says, signing an agreement with Cobalt and Song Trust inherently puts the composer, musician, publisher in contractual conflict with PROs, as BMI, etc., require exclusivity for 2 years of royalty collection and payments. You can't give BMI exclusivity and sign something with those other platforms that do cover streaming royalty collection. How to avoid this conflict? How do you avoid this conflict?
Well, you can agree to have, you can sign with Cobalt and Song Trust to collect your mechanical royalties, because your PRO is not collecting mechanicals. And so that would be the purpose. So you have your PRO that collects your performance royalties, and then you would have Cobalt or Song Trust that would collect your mechanical royalties, because in the US, these two things are separate, are collected in completely different ecosystems.
Okay. Well, I hope answered the question there. Nick Blake's also saying thanks. He enjoyed the chat, but he's had to run. Here's another one from Chris. Sorry, let me get his name. Chris Elsden. He says, has there been much consumer research or user studies examining how users, fans actually want to support artists? Even as a huge music fan, it feels like there are very few ways for me to creatively support and engage financially with the music I like. I mean, Bandcamp immediately jumps to mind, but that's this one platform. Tom,
yeah. I mean, the subscription services have been incredibly slow and dragged their feet enormously in terms of all of the extra stuff that should be there in terms of for fans being able to engage with artists in order to be able to buy tickets from them and buy merchandise from them and do all the other things that they might want to do. Just throw money in a pot for them, you know. It's been. Yeah, it's just disappointing, really. And I think that's actually another tick in the box of user-centric is something that really kind of develops the relationship. It's almost like the system as it's set up at the moment wants to totally divorce the listener from having a relationship with the artist. And anything that brings them closer together and into closer harmony, I think is obviously a huge positive, because you know, I mean, and we're seeing it now with Spotify for artists and things like that. They are Spotify have gone, wait a minute, actually we can monetize this. Hello. We'll sell our own data back to the artists, and they'll and so that they can monetize these people who we know like them. It's like, oh, is that how it works?
Yeah.
We thought these people were just people who were just hanging around somewhere listening to our music. You think that we could get money off them if they like our music? Do you really? Yeah, about 10 years too late, but here we are.
Exactly. I also think that I think it's a great question, and one of the problems that I think we're feeling the unintended consequences of is that, you know, after music was disrupted by technology in 2000, that there was a proliferation of lots and lots of different service types, but everyone kind of settled on $9.99 per month on-demand streaming for all the music that was ever created. And this price was really determined as a price that would get people who are using P2P services either into like the Spotify free model, and that would get the people that are using P2P off of P2P services and into subscription environment. So it was a leap for many of those people who might have only bought one CD a year in the old world to go from spending $20 a year on recorded music to $120 a year on recorded music. But what has happened is the people that, like, I used to spend far more money on recorded music than I do now. And so we lopped off the top of the pyramid, the people who are willing to pay maybe $30, $40, $50 a month on recorded music. We've removed that. We've removed that opportunity for people to spend that money on recorded music. People still spend money on live. They might spend money on merch and other kinds of things. But I'm really bullish about companies that are coming into the marketplace that are saying, let's figure out where it's maybe music and games, some things that are more immersive. Maybe it is ways for fans to subscribe directly to an artist. Maybe it doesn't have anything to do with the recorded music. Maybe it's just about engaging with that artist and figuring out different ways to get money and value exchange directly between artists and fans that are at the top of the pyramid. And it's not going to be like, I don't care that any service has 50 million songs in it. I care about, I have probably 50 artists that are really, really meaningful for me. And I'm willing to pay and support them in any way that is possible. And I think a lot of people are in that boat. So we might see a change where maybe everyone's using streaming services for access to everything that's ever been created. But then we have some really bespoke other kinds of models where people can engage more meaningfully with money and time and mind share with artists that they really, really care about.
Well, I'll mention that we've seen that there actually is a market for that, and sort of obliquely through the sale of vinyl. And it was really interesting a few years back when the figures came out, and it turned out that 50% of people who buy vinyl don't actually own a turntable. And you could look at it in a cynical way. I looked at it in a really positive way because, I mean, like it or not, we're in a capitalist society, and we view value as an exchange of money for goods or whatever. And this was a way of doing it. It was a way of saying, I've bought this object because this is a totem that indicates that this has value to me. And I think I think we need to tie it into music as much as possible, as opposed to the whole merch, element, because that's one step away from the music itself. And it's a bit like saying, no, don't charge for what's inside of the box, just charge for the box. We've got to make it tied, and people with vinyl, you don't separate vinyl from the music that's on it. That is the physical manifestation of it. So if we can tie it into that in a direct fashion.
I agree. And I have just a very quick anecdote that I recently bought a turntable, and I haven't had a turntable for years. And I went to Amoeba in LA, and I have some of my old music from the 80s that I've still kept, but I went to Amoeba and I was like, oh, wow, okay, I'm going to buy some vinyl. And I picked out, 4 or 5 albums, went to the cash register, dropped $200 right there. And I thought, oh my God, this is more, I bought 5 albums that are already available on Spotify. And even though I pay my annual subscription for $120 a year, I just dropped $200 in an hour, and I have no problem with it. It meant something different to me to have the albums and to have the vinyl, and there is a different attachment. And I also felt like I know that this money is a high margin good that's going to these 5 artists that I love.
I've heard about something, streaming for ownership. Does anyone know about that? Can anyone explain that further? Tom, perhaps you nodding there.
I mean, there are so many different variations on this idea. It's essentially like there's a micropayment value to each stream until you reach the value of what an album would have cost, and then you keep it. It's as simple as that. But then there are there's other systems that we haven't talked about, which is there's lots of experimental systems with just micropayment. So your bank account is just attached to the streaming service, and each time you listen to a song, a tiny amount of money just goes out of your bank account into paying somebody. And you make that basic payment much higher than what Spotify is presently paying, but it solves a lot of the problems of licensing and money getting lost in the system. So yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think people are willing to pay more money for music. I think actually what's happening at the moment, a lot of money gets lost in like family packages and like add-ons where you get like an extra account for like an extra book, or you get it free with a phone, or you get it, all of this stuff. And it's just money that's completely lost to creators, and it's nice that people can get like 6 accounts for $15, but like, why? I don't think there's any science has gone into that, if I'm honest. I think someone's just picked that number out of it and gone, how much should we make a family account? How many people should we put on it? 6, that sounds right. I don't think, £9.99 in the UK in 2008 has the value now of £13.44, but it's still £9.99, which is something like a 26% drop in the value of music in 12 years on streaming platforms, right? So inherently, you've got a structural problem with the pricing strategy. And that's before you get into how it's divided up. So you don't want to get me started on this, really.
No, fair enough. But how do you convince, for example, teenagers who are like, music's free, man, come on, music's free.
Actually, see, this is the thing, is that as bad as a Luddite would be to be anti-technology at this point in history, don't be somebody who thinks that we're still in 2004 as well. Mm-hmm. We're not. We are now in a moment that is 12 years into streaming. These are not the children of P2P anymore. They're gone. Right. LimeWire and Napster, that's most of the kids I know don't know what that stuff is. Yeah. Right? People are used to paying for music again, but what we have to do is, and there's like much quoted data on people who stole music, which was that the people, when they did the research and they looked at who stole the most music, it was the people who also spent the most on music, right? And it's much quoted, and much quoted for a good reason, because the truth is that, I mean, Vickie's making an incredible point, which is the big problem with streaming is it completely cannibalizes the value of music. That one person puts enormous value on music, another person puts no value on music, and yet they both pay the same. And so it's just cannibalizing all of that. When I talk to young bands now, I say, look, if you can, think of it like physical, think of it as hardback, paperback lending library. Like, take it to sell vinyl for as long as you can, then take it to Bandcamp where they're paying you for it digitally. That's paperback. Sell it there for as long as you can. then give it to the lending library. That's the streaming service, because that's
Right.
once they've got it, you're not getting paid. So, you know.
But you do know that there are, you know, if you want your music to potentially meet, you know, get onto a playlist, then you have to release it on the streaming services.
Yeah, no. So you have to put 1 or 2 songs on the streaming service. Yeah, to get to radio. I mean, it's part of the regulations of radio now as well, that it has to be on a streaming service and things. So, yeah, of course. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, that you have to do that stuff too. But you know, it's the people have 50 million streams and earn what a primary school teacher earns. And earning enough money to be a primary school teacher is great, but 50 million listens.
Yeah.
We've completely devalued music.
Well, I'm all for revaluing music, because that wall behind me and the wall which you can't see will buy me a private yacht and a desert island. So I think, you know, we could go on and on. I mean, Martin Disley in the chat room says Zoomers are coming of age paying for digital totems on Fortnite, etc. This seems to me to be akin to purchasing a vinyl or buying something to support artists without the carbon. Is it, you know, that kind of makes sense what we're talking about? I mean, okay, we want to minimize buying vinyl, if you like, for the environmental impact it's having. So you want to sort of put some value on the digital side of things as well, I take it.
Right, of course. And I feel like gaming is a really, really amazing sector. It's bigger than music and film combined. And most of the things are free or very low cost to play, but people transact with on, and there's billions of dollars. And I'm completely supportive of it, as long as we get that money going through the value chain and going through the systems that the consumer buys a digital good, and that it finds its way back to the people who created it.
Mm-hmm. Well, a massive hooray for that. And I have to say, I think we could keep on talking about this and going through more questions and bits of chat, but thank you so much for your time. You've been fantastic. John, I must apologize for not coming to you as often, but with such experts as Vickie and Tom, you'll have to forgive me on this account. But hopefully I'll see you in 2 weeks' time for Delic Session 3.
Yeah, I hope absolutely. And I want to thank both Vickie and Thomas. It was great just listening, because you know, that's why we asked you to come in, because you have such strong opinions and have such, you know, educated and reasoned views on this. And because it's a really important thing for musicians and even music fans to have an understanding of. And just a plug is that, you know, Delic will solve all these problems. No, we won't solve all these problems, but we will help you not trip over things that can make it worse for you. It's a system that needs to be repaired, but if you go into it with the wrong data, and if you don't handle it, it becomes even worse.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about with the black box unrecovered royalties. I mean, it's an insane situation we've got to, and if we can start changing things, be it because of COVID-19, now is the time to do this and make sure that artists in the future aren't having the same kinds of problems as artists in the past and the present. John, I will see you in 2 weeks' time. We'll have another Delic session in 2 weeks' time. Please join us there. Tell all your friends to get in touch, to email questions to hello@delic.network. You can watch this session and the previous session up online as well, and we'll be live in 2 weeks' time. A massive thank you to Tom Gray and to Vickie Nauman. Thank you so much for chatting to us. And Tom, I suppose it's #broken record for... Yeah.
Come and find me on Twitter, Mr. Tom Gray with an A.
Okay, and people can find out all the good work you're doing to lobby government and try and make this a fairer place for everyone.
Yeah, that's for everyone. No, just for the musicians. Everybody, you know, other professions may still struggle.
Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and thank you to our panelists. And we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.